Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back with number 87 of our top 100 movies of all time. John's having a little technical difficulty right to start the episode, but he's back. Anybody
It's okay, I
watching?
figured it out.
We got to watch him just have a sheer look of fear on his face. But it looks like he's got it under control. It looks like he's better. We're going to be talking about Stand By Me and Jackie Brown tonight, one of Quentin Tarantino's least seen movies and a classic childhood movie, even though it's not a childhood movie. We're going to be talking about all that. We did do our Oscar episode last week for all of those who watched and listened. Thank you so much for listening and watching. It was a fun time. I started off 9 for 9, and then everything went to shit because pretty much the entire back half of that episode of the Oscars went to shit. So, yeah. I started off 9 for 9. Still ended up having a pretty good day. I went 15 of 23. I think, John, you were what? You were just over 500? You were 12 of 23?
Yeah, it was close to that. Some of the ones that I took risks on didn't really pay off for me. But sticking with that Nomadland pick for Best Picture still got me some points there.
Yeah, I didn't have Nomadland. I had tried to take a chance with Minari. That was really the only chance I took. The ones that I didn't win, I'm still shocked by. I went I was shocked that Francis McDormand beat Mulligan. Even though I've been saying all along Hopkins should win, I was shocked he beat Boseman, especially with how that episode was edited. What a terrible decision by Soderbergh, and I will rip him. I don't care. I mean, I understand that the intention was good, but the intention was good and it ended up being really, really bad. And then I still can't believe Nomadland didn't win cinematography. Those were three of the ones that I was really shocked I didn't win. The rest of them, it is what it is. Minari, I wasn't surprised I didn't win. Nomadland ends up winning. But it blows my mind that if Nomadland doesn't win cinematography, what makes that movie so damn good? I'm confused. I don't understand. But hello, I will move on and go somewhere else to complain about my life. That's what I got, John. All right. Enough about the Oscars. It happened. Yes. It was a terrible ending. Joaquin Phoenix presenting an award to a man who wasn't there might go down in history as the most awkward moment in Oscar history. Even more awkward than La La Land beating Moonlight just to lose to Moonlight. But anyway, that's a good tie-in. We're talking La La Land next week. But tonight we're talking Stand By Me and Jackie Brown. We don't know. I don't know which one to start with. I think let's start with Jackie Brown because it's Quentin Tarantino. It's Quentin Tarantino, but it's not very seen Quentin Tarantino. Stand By Me, I feel like maybe has a bigger audience. I don't know. This is actually a tricky one. But Jackie Brown, John, it's your number 87. Why does Jackie Brown land on your list?
I personally think Jackie Brown is Quentin Tarantino's most underrated film. And this is coming from a guy who actually appreciates Death Proof quite a lot.
Oof, I hate that movie with a passion.
But Jackie Brown just feels like this movie that kind of it's in this vacuum where people kind of forgot how good Quentin Tarantino movies were, because it's sandwiched between coming off Pulp Fiction and then before Kill Bill. And this is kind of Quentin Tarantino's first experimentation with an incredibly strong female lead that kind of led the way for Kill Bill. And it's so fun. And the performances in this movie are some of the absolute best in a Quentin Tarantino movie. I would have said the best had Once Upon a Time in Hollywood not come out.
Well, and Inglourious Bastards, I do feel that Christoph Waltz and Inglourious Bastards, a little unfair, but yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there's some great performances. This movie, to me, I agree with you that it's underrated Quentin Tarantino, because everything else is too highly rated of Quentin Tarantino. This is the only one that kind of just gets tossed to the side. I think the Kill Bills might actually be underrated at this point because they don't get talked about as often. But my thing with Jackie Brown is the last hour of this movie is perfection. The last hour of this movie is Quentin Tarantino clicking on all cylinders. Robert Forster is phenomenal. Robert De Niro's breakdown is so incredible. Samuel L. Jackson should have been nominated for an Oscar for this movie. It's a crime he was not. Ordell is one of Quentin Tarantino's best written characters, and that's saying something considering how many great characters Quentin Tarantino has written. Bridget Fonda's Beach Bunny Stone thing is, fun to watch. Pam Grier is phenomenal in this movie. And in the end, it really feels like the stakes are all there. And I love the back and forth and who's actually screwing over who, what's part of the plan, what's not. To me, the pacing in the first hour and a half, though, is a little all over the place. I ended up giving this one. This is the second time I've seen it. It's only twice, but I ended up giving this one 3 stars out of 4. And my main reasoning was the pacing. I feel that at times it gets a little too into Tarantino. And while there's some very fun moments, I feel like it puts aside some of those fun moments to have drawn out scenes that don't need to be as drawn out. And they don't pop the way a Pulp Fiction does, or an Inglourious Bastards does, or the way Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does, which are my 3 favorite of the Tarantino movies. That's really my only thing. Still, 3 stars out of 4 is a very good movie. It's when you get to 4 out of, like, it's just because it's Tarantino, you want everything to be a 4 out of 4. But I do understand why, as a movie fan and as a Tarantino fan, this would be a movie that would end up on your list and in your top 100.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that it still has that real biting dialogue that Tarantino is so well known for. And the characters are incredible. And yeah, that first hour and a half of this movie is a lot of time setting up characters and setting up exactly how these characters are connected to each other. Because at first, it doesn't really seem like they are. And despite the fact that we have Michael Keaton's character being the cop or the ATF agent and working with Jackie Brown to take down Ordell, while Jackie's also working him for Ordell, it almost gets so convoluted that it is a little hard to follow at times to figure out exactly who Jackie's doing what for. But in the end, Jackie's doing everything for herself this movie. And that, I think, is what really elevates it for me, is that Jackie is just this incredible female protagonist, strong, independent woman who uses the men around her in a way that just benefits herself, but it's never in a way where she's being exploited by any means, right? She's not, despite the fact that it's made very clear the first time Robert Forster's Max sees Jackie Brown that he's like completely infatuated with her. She's never represented as like a sex symbol or anything. She's always just this business first lady who is working to get herself ahead in life. And when you look at Tarantino's other films prior to this, we didn't get that from his female characters. We almost got it from Mia in Pulp Fiction, but it doesn't quite get there because she's such a side character in that movie. So having that focus on Jackie in this movie is just something you didn't really see when this movie came out.
Yeah, and Tarantino starts to become at his best when he does start to really figure out how to balance the male and female characters in his movie. Pulp Fiction, the reason it's such a classic is because Mia is such a phenomenal character, and her interactions are great, but she's always kind of at the beck and call of John Travolta. That's John Travolta's storyline while Uma Thurman is in the movie. You know what I mean? And so I look at like what you end up seeing with Shoshana in Inglourious Bastards, what you end up seeing with God, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Sharon Tate in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he really does start to have the confidence, I feel like, to kind of not just make these men only movies like we saw with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, because at the end of the day, Pulp Fiction is really more of one of those men only type movies. And I think what adds to Pam Grier and Jackie Brown's character in this movie is the fact that everything around her is so convoluted, but she knows what's going on at all times. The only time she's truly stumped is when the cocaine is found in her manila envelope. She doesn't know that's there, but other than that, for the rest of the movie, she is very on top of every single thing that is going on in this ridiculously convoluted plot. Now, I think the convolution at the end is fun. I think all the convoluted stuff at the beginning is just a little tedious, and it is what it is. It's like some of the stuff that Tarantino, I always look at True Romance as the baby version of Pulp Fiction. Now, I like True Romance more than this movie, but I look at True Romance as the baby version of Pulp Fiction. And I look at this as the, how do I continue to make Pulp Fiction, but also make the movies I want to make? And I feel like that's what he learned with Inglourious Bastards, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Kill Bills. And he didn't really know how to handle that yet in Jackie Brown. But all of the sloppiness that might hurt the movie overall, in my eyes, does actually make the character of Jackie Brown a better character in the long run.
Yeah, and because that beginning half of the movie does spend a long time. We get that very elongated first introduction to Ordell, where he's just showing Robert De Niro's character like the different guns.
Chicks who love guns.
Chicks who love guns. And in that moment we find Ordell, but it goes a little too long. It is a little long. I get that. And then we have the whole thing with Beaumont that then is kind of just like shoved off the side, uses a plot device quickly to make it so that Jackie and Max have to interact with each other and stuff. But the chemistry between Pam Grier and Robert Forster in this movie is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, Robert Forster is really good. He was nominated for supporting actor for this movie at the Academy Awards, and he totally earned it. I think De Niro was great too and could have fought his way in there. But Robert Forster is so good because he just plays that normal mid-50s guy who's okay with where he's at. He's okay with where he's at. And you know what? That's just the life he's going to live. He's kind of in this riffraff type city. There's nothing he can do about it. He deals with the low of the low. That's what he does. But he's not necessarily the low of the low, although we do see him taking these types of chances and using people in ways throughout this movie. But it's almost like he's got that baby face, just normal 56. I think at one point he says he's 56, but just that baby face 56-year-old guy where it's like, oh, he's just so nice. He's just doing what he needs to do. And I do agree. The Beaumont stuff is funny. Chris Tucker is funny in the role. I love that shot of the car just driving around the corner just so he can shoot him. I think that's very funny. But at the end of the day, all that does is tell us, like, yeah, Ordell is dangerous.
Yeah.
That scene could have been 3 minutes long. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about with this movie where it doesn't always work. There's no part of Pulp Fiction where I say, oh, I hate this scene. And there's no part of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where I say I hate this scene. There's no part of Inglourious Bastards where I say I hate this scene. Jackie Brown starts to veer on some of those scenes where I'm like, oh, can we just get through this one so we can get to the next scene? Because the next one's better than this one. And I do like all the little things when she's at the bar with Samuel L. Jackson and, hey, how you doing? I'm fine. Oh, yes, you are. Like, I love those little things that go into the blaxploitation, which is, you know, the type of movie that Tarantino was making here with one of the biggest stars of the genre in Pam Grier, if not the biggest star of the genre. But sometimes it just feels like it's like, where are we right now? Why are we over here? Like, why are we over here and kind of off the page? Why aren't we coming back? And one thing I will say about this movie, it goes a long time without certain characters being in the movie, which I actually think hurts the movie, because there are certain stretches where Jackie's not in it for a while, or Louis Vara is not in it, or Cara, whatever his name is not in it for a while, or Dell kind of pops up for the most part. But even Robert Forster, he's not in the movie for long stretches. I think that's where I start to lose a little bit. It's like, could there have been something trimmed? I read Rum Punch by Elmer Leonard. I did not like it very much. I think it was just as sloppy. It was sloppier than this movie. And I think that Tarantino working off of that and then trying to make something else as well, it's just too much going on in my estimation. But it's your number 87, so I should stop talking negatively.
No, it's totally fine, because that's what we're here for, is this great constructive conversation about film. But I'm really glad you brought up the blaxploitation aspect of this movie, because it's definitely harkening back to the blaxploitation movies of the 70s. And what's nice about this is it feels like it doesn't push the boundary on blaxploitation at all. How it definitely has the elements of it. It has the influence of it, but it's not actually exploiting black culture like those movies were back in the 70s. It's not like Live or Let Die, which was ridiculously blaxploitation, whereas it has those elements of like the funk and of the Motown, but it's all incorporated very well into the film, and not in a way where it's jarring or where it makes it seem like the characters are a caricature.
Yeah, and I think that just showed that Tarantino was always playing with house money when it came to his writing skills. He was just naturally born talented. I know Spike Lee had made the argument after Django Unchained that he has a serious problem with the N-word. What I find very interesting, though, in these movies is that a lot of the times it is the black characters who are saying it. It's not, well, obviously in Django Unchained, that's different because that is about a racist slave owner on a plantation. That's different. But when I look at a movie like Jackie Brown, there's so much there's no degradation of a culture or anything like that in these movies. And Samuel L. Jackson, I just feel like Samuel Jackson's just sitting there hanging out, and like we're just like watching like a version of Samuel L. Jackson just like live his life. And I think that he just is so good at writing that type of dialogue without making it feel like it's crossing a line. And that's not easy to do. That's really not easy to do. And I think he does a phenomenal job in this movie with Ordell's dialogue, the conversation between Ordell and Jackie. I think he does really well with all of that. But then he also does really well with Ordell and Lewis. Like their conversations are so funny. The way that Ordell talks about Melanie is hilarious. Like there's so much of that stuff where there's enough degrading of people, but it never really crosses a line that a lot of times if people just, listen to the movie and don't really like, you just watch a scene from something and be like, ew, what is this? This doesn't hold up well. I disagree. I think Tarantino's movies hold up incredibly well because he was normally copying a genre while he was writing these things, and he wasn't just doing it because he could get away with it because he was writing a movie. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And part of that also comes from the fact that his movies also have this, despite having a distinct time period where they happen, they also feel out of that time period at the same time. And that's how I felt about this movie. I found myself watching the movie this time, and I was like, wait, when is this movie set? And it wasn't until they actually said the year 1995 that I knew it was set in the 90s.
Yeah, and the only reason I had a feeling it was the 90s, because I agree with you, you don't really know when it's set, but the only reason I think 90s is because when Michael Keaton says that now you've been doing this for 19 years. And I think to myself, Jackie Brown, she's the type of woman who was probably killing it in a disco club. There's no way that this is set in the 70s and she was alive in the 50s. You know what I mean? Like Jackie Brown is a woman who had to have been killing it in the 70s. And I kind of got the same thing from Lewis. Like he was that type of 70s, 80s degenerate. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference in that type of character. And even down to Max Cherry. Max Cherry's character is a very 90s low-life cop type character. That's what you saw a lot. And then if there were any questions, it really comes down to how loud is Michael Keaton's jacket in this movie, because the pleather just will not stop rubbing against the pleather.
No, definitely. And when I put this movie on, I forgot Michael Keaton was in it. Because his character is so minor, but so pivotal to the plot. And it's really interesting because the scene where he comes in, like they're playing this bad cop, good cop thing, and he's definitely coming across as this good cop. But you can also tell he's just the better cop in that instance as well. And there's a reason why he's the one who gets Jackie to kind of agree to everything.
Yeah, Michael Bowen plays a great schmuck. He was in 2 years later, he's in Magnolia as Stanley's father, and he is such a dick in that movie. But like, you just buy it. There's just something about Michael Bowen's face that says to you, like, man, this guy would suck as a cop. This guy would suck as a like. You hate to be like that, but he just plays those roles so well. And I agree. Like Michael Keaton, I think Max Cherry says at one point, that's a guy who just loves to be a cop. Like he just wants to be a cop. And just he lets it go to his head. But you can see that he studied it too. Even down to the first interaction they have in the parking garage, he's already playing good cop. But really, he's just playing the what can we get away with here? Like he knows the book. He knows it so well. But he also knows that he's about to screw over Jackie Brown and get her on something. And she does end up outsmarting him at one point, but not totally outsmarting him. They don't realize that she has $500,000 in her bag because that's why she plants the $40,000 on Ordell and the $10,000 on Melanie, which is very smart of her.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that Tarantino decides never to really give us who gave up the fact that Jackie was coming back with the money in the first place so that the ATF can get her.
Yeah, we assume it's Ordell, but we don't really... Well, not Ordell. Well, we assume it's Beaumont, right? Beaumont.
There's an assumption there, but we never really confirmed. And I love the fact that the film doesn't focus on that aspect of it, because it could have just been like this witch hunt with Ordell. Ordell, like you said, is one of Tarantino's best characters. But part of that comes from the fact that he knew how to properly utilize the character in this movie. And if we had been following Ordell the entire time in this movie, it wouldn't be as good. Because it becomes a very different movie. when Jackie's our main focus and she makes mention, how do they know to be waiting for me? And you're like, oh yeah, that's a thing. But it's such a minor detail because it doesn't matter for the rest of the plot that it's okay that it's never answered, because it just shows Jackie's adaptability to any situation.
Well, and I always think, let's say this movie wasn't called Jackie Brown. Let's say he stuck with Rum Punch and called it Rum Punch. For the first 25 minutes, you would think Samuel L. Jackson is the main character of the movie. That changes in the house scene where he keeps trying to shut off the lights because he's going to kill her and she pulls the gun on him. That's when the movie becomes Jackie Brown's movie. Up until that point, it's about all the other guys around her, and she just feels like a supporting character. She almost feels like Bruce Willis in Pulp Fiction, where it's like, okay, she's here. It seems like this is a big plot point, but what's going on? But the moment that she turns the tables on Ordell, that's when the movie becomes Jackie Brown's. Because if you realize after that, everybody's at her beck and call. The cops are waiting on her. Max Cherry is waiting on her. Ordell is waiting on her. It's all down to what Jackie Brown wants to make happen. Whereas before that, it's all the buildup of the cops get her. Ordell has his whole plan going on. Max Cherry dealing with Ordell. Like, nothing matters. But then it becomes Jackie Brown's story to tell. And I think that's really incredible writing there, to be able to shift who your main character is, in the first act of a movie, especially when it's somebody as big as Samuel Jackson. And Samuel Jackson was not as big in 1997 as he is now, but still coming off of Pulp Fiction, he was pretty big at this point. He wasn't Snakes on a Plane big, but he was really big at this point. And so to be able to shift that and give it to a person who hasn't really had much of a career since the 70s, 80s, that's a really, really impressive thing to do. And I think it just works perfectly.
Yeah. And it's the balancing of the characters in this, because I think Lewis would become a very irritating character if we got any more than what we did with him. But because we get his little bit of subservience at the beginning, and it's kind of like, I'm just here hanging out with Ordell because that's what I do. And because it's just so those little smatterings, when Robert De Niro snaps in the third act, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Because
it feels so authentic.
It does. It feels completely authentic. And at the same time, it's like, I can't believe he just did this. Which is exactly what Ordell feels, because he's like, I told him just to slap her.
Yeah. You couldn't have just slapped her. You couldn't. Well, I could have, but and just that interaction. And the thing is, you really believe Robert De Niro is high as hell this entire movie. You feel like he's stoned, and there's something off about him the whole movie with how quiet he is and all of that, and just the reaction. You're like, there's something wrong. This guy's a little psycho. There's a little something going on here. And just for that at the end, when she's just antagonizing him, you're like, he's gonna kill her. It's coming. This is gonna happen. And when it does, it's a totally believable flip. And I love when Ordell just kills him in the next scene, because that's what Ordell does. Ordell cleans up all the messes. He's not going to deal with that shit. Him and Jackie are in on this plan together, so he'll figure it out with Jackie. And, he lets his guard down at the end, but he really thinks that he's going to get his $500,000 from Jackie, and she's going to be happy just taking her $50,000. So I don't know. I think that's what I mean, though. This third act, it just works. But I agree with you. There is a balance to these characters that needed to be happening, because while the characters in some of Tarantino's other movies are endlessly watchable, these aren't endlessly watchable characters. These are despicable people that you don't want to spend too much time with. They're not fun gangsters. Vincent Vega is a fun gangster. Samuel Jackson in that movie, which for some reason I'm drawing a blank on his name, that's a fun gangster. That's a fun character. These aren't necessarily fun gangsters to be around. This is the low of the low. And I think that's why the bouncing around is necessary in a movie like this, or you're going to ultimately lose interest, because even the cops aren't that good of people in this movie.
No, not at all. You get the fact, you do feel like Michael Keaton's character is there for the greater good of it all. But at the same time, it's just but are you doing this for the greater good? Or are you doing this because you kind of get off on it?
Yeah, exactly. And him chewing the gum with that excitement the entire movie. You got to remember too, not many cops are whining and dining at steak restaurants, they're this like a Jackie Brown type character. Like he just loves to play that role of this big shot cop when he's really not that much of a big shot, and he's just more starting out. Whereas Michael Bowen just loves to be the smart ass. He doesn't take anything seriously the entire movie.
Yeah. But let's get into this third act, because it is really where this film shines. And a lot of that comes down from the structure Tarantino decided. The fact that we get our 3 different perspectives throughout this essential heist. We're going back to another Tarantino heist movie. We've seen the after effects at this point with Reservoir Dogs. Now we're getting into an actual Tarantino heist. And starting it with Jackie. And you're like, okay, Jackie's doing her thing. She's the mastermind behind it all. We kind of have an idea of how things are going. But we don't see Robert for it. We don't see Max at all during that sequence. We see the interaction with Melanie. And then we just get Jackie's pure panic as she's coming out of the dressing room. You're like, what is going on? And that's when it clicks that, okay, she's creating a distraction with the cops now so that everything else can play out. And then we go back and we see the Melanie Lewis perspective of it all. And that plays out. And then you get more pieces because you do see Max in the store in Billington's, and you're starting to kind of piece it together more. And then you get the Max perspective. And I love that it's just like every time Tarantino goes back, it's like 2 or 3 minutes before the other segment started.
Yeah, and that's an old trick from The Killing. That was the first movie they did it, the Stanley Kubrick movie, The Killing, where it's like, and then at this exact time, and it's doing that. And I think that's such a fun way to do this scene because it lets you know, like, yeah, this all took place a minute before, and now something else is going to happen. And it lets you know that everything's happening simultaneously without having to show it simultaneously because it's more important to actually see these plot lines play out first. Jackie screaming, Nicolette, like, you got to come out, Ray. And then he comes out, and it's like, oh, man, like, what's going on? You don't really know. And then as it starts to piece together, the last part, you're like, Robert Forster just got away with $500,000, and the $50,000 is going elsewhere. So that Nicolette is going to think that, or Nicoletti, whatever his name is, but is going to think that Bridget Fonda just stole it. I mean, it's so well done. And this is all set up, though, by what I really do think is the best part of this movie and one of the best parts of a Tarantino movie, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, is the first bag exchange is where this is all really set up. We have heard about Sharonda, but we haven't seen Sharonda. And when Sharonda sits down next to Jackie Brown, and Jackie Brown says, just put the bag down and whatever, and Sharonda eats and whatever, you're like, all right, so Sharonda's the girl. She's going to take the bag. She's going to go. Is it going to work? But when the third person is involved and Robert Forster goes, it could work, that's when you're like, all right, there's something special going on here with this. And it's that type of wool being pulled over, like putting it right in front of your face, but having an extra element at the end of it. That's what works so well in the third act. And it all is set up by that first interaction of the bag exchange, which is just so brilliant because the cops are even following the wrong girl. And you're like, Jackie Brown's still in this all for herself. That is exactly who she's looking out for.
And she even manipulates it in a way to get rid of Ordell in the end too. Where she knows that she can't kill Ordell. She knows that Max can't kill Ordell. But she knows that if they're in that dark office and Ordell comes at her, that Michael Keaton's going to be there to kill them. And then she's scot free at that point. Yeah. No one else, no one the wiser.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then it's just her and Max Cherry who know, and Max Cherry's never going to bail on her because Max Cherry only wants his 10%, as we find out at the very end here. So, but so all that. And then another thing that Tarantino does really well in this movie, and it's something that he's known for, obviously, is his music. And his music has always been like one of the best things for him. My favorite thing throughout this, though, is the Delphonics. And how it plays when Max Cherry is driving around and stuff, because he's got this little boy crush on Jackie Brown. And I think that's just such great characterization with something so simple. And even when Ordell's like, oh, I didn't know you listened to Delphonics. He's like, yeah, they're pretty good. Like, just those little moments. It's just because he has this crush on somebody who's not living the same life as him.
Mhm.
And he has to buy the 8-track so he can go listen to it in the car, the cassette, whatever it is. And I just love those little things with the music in this movie. The music isn't just to make people seem cool while they're walking, although there was certainly that at the beginning. And then at the end with whatever the song is that was stuck in my head while I was trying to sleep last night. But I love this Delphonics choice that he makes throughout the entire thing, because it makes Max Cherry so much more likable.
It does. And Max Cherry's character in this movie is so incredible, because you think he gets to a point where he's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get out of the bail bonds business. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I guess I understand why he doesn't want to do that anymore. I mean, he's kind of,
he's old.
Old and, like, not wanting to catch criminals to put them in jail anymore and stuff. But then at the end of the movie, he comes back and it's like, oh, never mind. He's just sticking with this bail bonds thing. He has this perfect opportunity to run off into the sunset with Jackie. And he just decides not to. So takes his 10%, and that's that.
And Andrew Denson says across 110th Street. Oh man, now it's in my head. Thank you, Andrew. Now it is there. But I also think that it makes the ending even more powerful with Jackie, because Jackie has to be the lone wolf. Jackie cannot be somebody who has a man or settles down with a man or anything. Like, she has to just go on. And I love how the songs play. And then finally towards the end, she starts mouthing the lyrics. You're like, all right, she's in her groove. Like, she knows exactly where she's going. And I think that is just such like I said, the characterization that is done through music in this movie, that's when Tarantino's at his best. And that's why his most popular movies, I do believe, are these movies with either a great Ennio Morricone score or with, Pulp Fiction and how everybody wants to buy that soundtrack. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you can listen to it with the fake commercials and everything. It's absolutely brilliant. Like, those are the types of things that, he just knows how to do. He really just understands it. All right, John, give me your last thoughts on Jackie Brown before we move over.
Jackie Brown is just one of those things that's kind of, we said it with a lot of films we covered already. It's kind of fallen into the background, especially with Tarantino's more popular works being really highly regarded. Take a look at it, because it is a fun movie.
Yeah, it's a good one. Not my favorite Tarantino, but again, that's because it's Tarantino. You know what I mean? I think that's what people forget sometimes. Like, it's kind of like the third Godfather's not a bad movie. It's just it's the third Godfather. And I think that's the problem sometimes. We were supposed to be talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood next week, because that's my number 86. But we're not going to be talking about it because John has that movie way higher than me, which is fine. So we'll be talking about that later. But we almost had back-to-back weeks of Tarantino, although unfortunately most of you are probably just going to get pissed off at me for talking about La La Land. But anyway, let's move on to my number 87, which is Stand By Me, the Rob Reiner movie from 1986, one of the only 80s movies that actually makes my list. There's not many of them, folks, so when you see them, don't blink. So yeah. You don't want to blink. That's all I'll say. But Stand By Me, I grew up on a cul-de-sac in New Jersey where I lived in the middle, and I had my best friend live 3 houses down from me on the right, and my best friend lived 3 houses down from me on the left. They were both a year older than me, but we did everything together. I mean, me and my one friend, we still joke about it that we had there was a 4-day period where we slept over each other's houses every day. We didn't have bad families or anything like that. It wasn't like one of those things of, oh, well, we want to keep you away from, whatever. No, it was literally just, we're going to spend 96 straight hours together, and that's what's going to happen. So Stand By Me is a movie that I just kind of hold dear to my heart, of those childhood kind of, one of those friends I really don't talk to anymore. The other one I see pretty much every time I go home. And it's how does that work? And those interactions you have that feel so monumental in the moment. To me, this is the best movie about childhood friendship ever made, because there's no love story. There's nothing like that. It's just a childhood friendship movie. And you might sit there and say, oh, the Richard Dreyfuss voiceover and this is a little hokey and whatever. But the fact that he really is writing this the entire time, that is how he's writing it. He's writing it that matter-of-factly, and I just think that this really does a great job of capturing that. Where are we going, and how are we going to get there? But also, are we really going to go through these changes where we're not all together anymore? And that's just I don't know. Rob Reiner just does a phenomenal job of getting it in this movie.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. This what makes this movie stand the test of time and why we are still talking about it all these years later is the fact that it just encapsulates everything about childhood. The fears of growing up without your friends, the fear of just growing up in general, and that excitement and adventure, and just like taking a moment to go do something and go on an adventure. And that's what really brings this film to higher levels for me, is the fact that it is so representative of what it is just growing up.
Yeah. There's something about a movie like this with that expresses also the freedom of childhood. I always laugh as we get older, we all get terrified of everything. You know, is somebody going to break in your door? Is somebody going to like try to steal your car? Is somebody going to do that? You have all these thoughts that go through your head when as a child, it's how can I lie to my parents so I can go do this ridiculous thing that I wouldn't even do when I was 40? And them going on a 20-mile hike through the woods of Oregon to find a dead body. None of them would do that when they're 25 years old. None of them would do that when they're 35 years old. I don't like going out in the woods alone now. And I grew up in the Pine Barrens part of New Jersey, where that's what you did. And I just think that there's something to be said about how this type of adventure, because it's not a Lord of the Rings adventure. It's not something ridiculous. No. It's just something that kids would do, where you would say, hey, let's get on our bikes and ride around town at 10 p.m. in the pitch blackness because we can. Because we have friends and nobody's going to mess with us. When in reality, that's when you're at the most danger. Now you won't do that when you're 20 something because you're scared. Oh, am I going to get hit by a car? Is somebody going to mug me? Whatever it is. But as a child, you don't think about that stuff as you're coming of age. And these guys have no fear. They just have their own insecurities. And that's really what being this age is about. It's not about fear. It's about just being insecure and trying to figure out who you're going to be.
Yeah, and what's really great is there's the moment in this movie where River Phoenix is talking to Will Wheaton's character, and he's just talking about not letting his friend, like your friends, drag you down, right? Not settling because Gordy can go on to be a fantastic writer and go on to all these like higher courses and stuff, and he doesn't want to because he feels like it's going to like lose his friendship with everyone because it's going to pull him away. Mm-hmm. But then Chris just has that conversation with him of like, no, you have to do this. You can't let us pull you down and prevent you from doing what you're capable of doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And Chris Chambers ultimately is able to pull himself up, you know, and I think that's what brings this out. River Phoenix is, I just want to make sure, he's 16 years old in this movie. 16. He died at the age, wait, hang on. I got to make sure I have these right. So hang on. I want to make sure that this is all correct, but I believe he's 16. Yeah, he's 16 years old in this movie, probably younger when they were filming, probably closer to 15. He dies at 23. Do you think that his death and the fact that this movie has pretty much been out only since he died, like there was 7-year span where he was alive and this movie was out and then he died at such a tragic young age, and Chris Chambers' character also dies at a tragic young age. Do you think that actually adds to this movie, the fact that reality kind of reflected the art? And when you watch this, seeing what a great actor and how talented River Phoenix was, and knowing that he would grow up and like he would be in good My Own Private Idaho and all those movies, but to die so young and so tragically, and like almost like he did make it and then he had the tragedy. Same thing with Chris Chambers, who was able to get out of it and then has the tragedy. Do you think that actually makes this movie a little bit more haunting and a little bit, it elevates it to a level that other movies can't be elevated to?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, because I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that the themes of this movie as well, because one of the major themes in this movie is the power of storytelling and the power of stories. So the fact that this story can now be grounded in the real world as well helps elevate it to a higher level than most people would ever anticipate.
Yeah. It's so sad, and I have a hard time watching it, seeing River Phoenix in the movie, you know, because just watching him be this character who's struggling with all these things. And at the beginning of the movie, now most of the time when you watch this movie for the first time, you don't even realize, because it's in the newspaper, it says attorney Chris Chambers stabbed in bar fight. By the time they say Chris Chambers' name, it's the last person introduced, or maybe Vern is the last one introduced, but it's introduced after crazy guy who Corey Feldman, I can't think of his name, but it's introduced after him. And so because it's introduced after him, you almost forget that you even saw that name, and you don't put two and two together that that's what's kind of setting him off. Or if you do, whatever. But for me, you kind of, the first time I watched this, and numerous times, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, that's what the newspaper says. I always forget about that. But to see the struggles of this kid and all his insecurity, even though he's the tough guy, he's the one with the gun, he's the one who's going to stand out, he's the leader of their group. I don't know. There's just something extra heartbreaking about it. The fact that he also died at 23 years old. I mean, there's just something extra heartbreaking about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because, I mean, we were robbed of a fantastic actor who could have gone on and made a fantastic name for himself and still managed to do so despite dying at such a young age. Yeah.
No, it's really, really tragic. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's just tragic. But so I do want to talk about the acting in this movie, because Jerry O'Connell, Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, and Corey Feldman. Movies with kids normally don't work because kids normally aren't that good of actors. They're hard to work with. They can be difficult. They can, that's why a lot of times they'll try to push them out, or they'll only get smaller roles, because you can't do the same things to a kid that you can do to an adult in order to get them to get the performance, because that's child abuse, or that's just you're overworking the kid. There's different labor laws when it comes to a child. So there's only so much you can do. Every single one of them just kills it in this movie. And I like, when I think about friend groups, and it's not my own, this is the friend group you put together. Like, this is and you think of these people, like you think of these characters, just perfectly casted. And I don't know how they got so damn lucky with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming they took a lot of hard work on this to get this cast together, because they did get really lucky with these younger actors. And the fact that what's really great is each of these actors has their moment to shine in this movie too. Because I think that's really important to the character, where we're getting the story out of Gordy, because he's obviously narrating it. We know Chris is kind of like this leader role. And Vern's kind of like the tag along kid who's kind of on the outside trying to impress everyone. And why can I also not remember Corey Feldman's character's name?
I don't know why I can't remember his name. It's driving me crazy. LeChance. That's all. No, he's not LeChance. Gordy LeChance. All I know is his dad's a loony. That's what I know. His dad's a loony, as they keep saying.
But he has that incredibly powerful moment at the junkyard right then. And phenomenal what they were able to pick off. The fact that this was mainstream
Teddy.
Stephen King short story, Teddy, yes. That it's great when the movie can be presented in a way where people often forget this is a Stephen King short story. Despite the fact that it came out in the 80s when Stephen King was all the rage. But people often forget that he's the originator of this story.
So do you know what other famous short story was in this short story collection?
Which one?
Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, there you go.
He had, so in that, it's called Different Seasons. There's 4 short stories. It's Apt Pupil. I forget the other one. Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, and The Body. That's what this one's called, The Body. Man, sometimes Stephen King is okay. You know, in my opinion, there's some times where he just can't write. I mean, my friends keep going back and forth every time that we're having this conversation, and they all read The Dead Zone. And now whenever somebody says something stupid, we always put up the line of, let's face it, gang, she was downright sexy or something like it's just terrible writing. It's just absolutely horrific. But at that point in his career with those 2 short stories back to back, oh my God, they are just brilliant. And The Body in particular is the one that really gets me, because I just think, especially calling it The Body, this boy's not even a human, you know what I mean? And to call it a body, but you forget it's Stephen King, because Stephen King is always, the horror guy. The 2 best movie adaptations of Stephen King books are not horrors. You could argue the 3 best if you throw The Green Mile in there, because The Green Mile could easily be thrown in there. Really, his horror ones don't work. I'm because a lot of times they come across as hokey. The Shining, obviously, that
It's a
actually
departure
is
from Stephen King anyway,
Yeah.
so it doesn't really count.
Yeah, that's an adaptation that's not like that he hated. So
Yeah.
so I can't give Stephen King the credit if he thinks that sucks because clearly he doesn't know what's good. But so like when you look at authentic adaptations, Stand By Me and Shawshank Redemption are both pretty authentic adaptations.
Yeah.
And they just do such a great job of capturing what he was trying to capture. I think Stand By Me, like you said, you forget it's a Stephen King thing. And if you see Stephen King's name come up, you're like, really? A movie about like this type of thing? There's no evil clown. There's no vampire. There's no, like, it's just kids. The villain is Ace. And Stephen King has a serious issue with bullies because he knows how to overwrite them to the point where they're downright friggin' terrifying. And Ace Merrill is downright terrifying in this movie.
Yeah, and Kiefer Sutherland is phenomenal in the role.
Mm-hmm.
He does a great job. And you watch him and you just think he's unhinged the entire time. You have no idea how he's going to respond to any given circumstance. And you do think there are multiple times where he's just going to kill one of these kids.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the movie, you really think he's going to kill the kid until Will Wheaton pulls out the gun, and then he still feels like he's going to kill the kid. I mean, it's really unreal, and it still feels like he's going to kill him. And ultimately, he realizes, like, Gordy LeChance isn't messing around right now. Gordy LeChance he's ready to kill you because nobody's going to figure it out here. And the line that gets me is, "What are you going to? You're not going to kill all of us." And he goes, "No, Ace, just you." And it like clicks in his mind, and you can see it through the acting, through the emotion on his face of, he would only have to kill me. Everybody else would just flop after that. They're not going to do anything. And who does Ace care about more than Ace? Nobody. So why the hell would he take a chance like that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also really important that Sean Astin's character in the movie.
Who? Sean Astin's on this movie. Sean Astin? No. Sean Astin. I don't think Sean Astin's in this movie. I'm saying that. I wasn't saying that as like a John, you're so dumb. I was saying that as like if Sean Astin's in this, I'm blowing my... I think you're thinking of Bradley Gregg.
Maybe.
Is that the one who plays Eyeball?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who plays Chris's brother, right? Yeah.
I'm just having a mind fart there.
No, that's all good. But yes, I was going to say, if Sean Astin's in this movie, I missed it all the times.
The fact that Eyeball is Chris's brother and is like just letting Ace essentially murder him. It's wild.
Well, and remember, Vern's brother's in there too.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just wild that these people are just so infatuated with Ace. Let's just call it what it is. Is it out of fear or is it out of admiration? I'm pretty sure it's admiration why all these people are hanging out with Ace.
I think it's both.
And like so much so that they're willing to let him murder their brothers.
Yeah. It takes to the extreme the little brother, big brother relationship. It takes it to the extreme, but it has to be that extreme to offset Gordy's relationship with his brother. It has to be that extreme because it has to be how sunshine and roses everything was with his brother, while the other kids have the worst brothers you could have. And Teddy Duchamp doesn't even have a brother, let alone even a father figure. He's got nothing. You know what I mean? And I think it adds that characterization. And I think another thing that is very important with this movie is that it is from the perspective of a writer writing about it years later. Yes. And I think that's what's so important about this movie, because the stuff with John Cusack as the brother probably wasn't that great. And the stuff with the parents probably wasn't that bad. But it's allowed to be exaggerated because he's writing about it. And it happened years ago. And when you write about stuff, you do exaggerate it because it makes a better story. And of course, the mom should essentially be comatose. And of course, the dad should say things like, why can't your friends be like his friends? And of course, when he goes to pick up hamburgers at the shop, what do you do? If you don't play football, what do you like? It has to be this over the top stuff. And so maybe Ace was terrible, but maybe Ace wasn't quite to the level of trying to kill somebody with a knife, because we don't get any type of conclusion as to whatever happened to Ace. We probably would have heard that he was in jail for something if he had actually murdered somebody.
But no, it was Teddy who ended up in jail.
Yes, but it was, which makes sense based on his background.
But that again brings us back to this theme that we had last week, where we were talking about the unreliable narrator, and where again, this is our third movie in 2 weeks where it's being told from the very particular perspective of a certain character in recollection. And how we as viewers have to view that going into it. And like I said earlier, Stand By Me is all about stories, because it is a story being told by a writer recollecting this very important life moment and this tale of friendship. The inciting incident in this is a story. The inciting incident is Vern overhearing the conversation about them finding the dead body. And then that's what incites our four main characters to go on this journey in the first place. We have the story of Chopper and Sick Balls. And then you see Chopper, and it's like, this looks like the friendliest dog in the world.
Yeah.
And that's the power of stories, right? The power of stories to put fear, especially in children that age. That's the important thing with the age of these children, because they're going into middle school. So they're what, 12?
Yeah, something like that.
At that age, you do believe these stories. You believe those stories from your older brothers who are telling you, oh yeah, this junkyard dog knows exactly how to sick you in the one place you don't want to be sicked. And then it plays out and you're like, okay, what are you trying to tell us here when you show us that this story isn't true? And then, of course, we have the storytelling scene later where we just have Gordy telling a story to everyone. And they're like, that's the end?
Yeah. It's a great story, Gordy. Just didn't like the ending. But then everything about Teddy Duchamp's life is also a story. You have Teddy Duchamp's entire life is about the story of his father storming the beaches at Normandy because he thinks his father's a hero, but then everybody really knows the story of his father being a loony. You have Chris Chambers. He could never succeed being from that family. And that's all. His narrative's already been written. And something interesting, a decision that was made in this movie, definitely purposefully, Richard Dreyfuss's name in this movie is the writer. He is not considered Gordy LeChance age whatever. He is called the writer. There's a good chance that a lot of what he's saying is either made up or exaggerated to an extreme, but Chris Chambers, we know, was real because it's the only thing there. And it could just be that at this age, he's thinking about it. There's so many perspectives you can take with this movie. Now, I'm not one of those people who's going to overthink the crap out of a movie that doesn't need to be overthought like that. I'm going to be like, they were dead the whole time. No, that's stupid. That's dumb. But I do think that there's something to be said that they made the decision to call him the writer. To call him the writer and be like, he made up. There's probably a lot in this story that's made up. Now it's up to you to kind of determine what's real and what's made up, because in childhood, it's the big fish thing. Everything is bigger than you remember. Summer was 10 months long and school was 2 months long when you're a kid. That's how it feels. And I think that this movie, it's saying to you, yeah, Ace Merrill felt like the kind of guy who would pull a knife on you, and the only way you could stop him was to pull a gun on him. Is that true? I don't know. But it's made into a damn believable story.
Yeah, and that's what makes this movie so compelling, is because it is a story, and it's a story that people can relate to, even if it is an exaggeration of events, even if it doesn't quite play into what actually happened. It's relatable, which in the end is what a good story needs. Yeah.
And some of my favorite scenes from this movie, the leech scene, I think that one's great. That one's just such like a nice wake up. The first time they find the body, I think, is just so perfectly well done with just the silence and nobody even like they don't really have to search for it once they get there. It was right where they thought it was going to be. And the train scene is just all-time classic scene of of Vern won't get up and run, and now Gordy is stuck behind him, and here comes this train, and you know they're gonna live, but the way that suspense is built up of like, holy crap, is this actually gonna happen to them? It's so well done, and I don't know. Those are the scenes that really get me. And then obviously the lard ass scene is just so over the top and ridiculous that it's hard not to recollect on the castor oil blueberry pie eating man called lard ass.
Yeah, and these are also scenes where you kind of relate to. Again, it takes you back to those childhood memories. I mean, we've all had those moments on train bridges where a train's been coming and we had to run off the bridge, right?
Yeah, all the time. All the time. Unfortunately, like there were some trains that were really going back in my day. So yeah.
But it's also, we all have, leeches are one of those things that as a child you fear more than anything.
Mm-hmm. And they don't even do anything to you.
No, like that's the brilliance of this movie, is that it really plays up the fears of childhood in a way where it's the obvious fears with the dog and with Ace, and the less obvious fears of growing up and being away from your friends, or the real exaggerated fears with like leeches, which everyone is terrified of.
Just seeing a dead body. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like there's that excitement of seeing a dead body, and then they see the dead body and they're just like, no, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, it feels like those main characters that we've been on this journey with for the last hour and a half, they grow up at that moment, and you understand that with them coming to the end. It was the last Sunday before Labor Day. School was starting in like 2 days, and they finally got to go on this journey, and then we had the ending where they split up. They didn't really hang out with each other again after that. It just encapsulates childhood so well.
Yeah, I know. And the last line of I never had friends like I did when I was 12 years old. Jesus, does anybody? It's just one of those things that really just makes you think about, your whole time growing up. It's what the Sandlot has that line of like, you all go out to play with your friends one last time. You just have no idea when it's going to be. Jordan Alford saying in here, Sandlot, when the beast is just a normal dog, but in the eyes of the children, it's a monster. But like, there's that idea of you just think it's going to keep going that way. You don't realize that there's going to be that final day. You don't realize that there's going to be that final time or any of that stuff. And then it starts to feel normal that you're moving away from it, that it no longer is there. And a lot of times when you try to do this, we're going to get into in like 2 years, we're going to be talking about Moonrise Kingdom, which is I think it's my number 6 all time.
Yeah.
There's a melancholy that you just can't capture about childhood. It's so impossible to capture. Moonrise Kingdom does it brilliantly. I tell people it's the saddest movie I've ever seen, and they laugh at me. And I'm like, no, that movie is brutal. And we'll talk about that, like I said, in 2 years. But Stand By Me does it too. It gives you that melancholy and that longing for, oh man, do you remember those nights when like whatever part of the world you lived in? But for me, it's like, those humid July nights when there was nothing to worry about. And somebody said, you want to come over and swim in the pool, or should we walk to Wawa, or should we go to, you don't even think about those moments. Let's go play wiffle ball in the front yard as the sun is setting. And you can still envision it 20 years later, even though you did it 25 times, you just never knew when it was going to end. And this movie does such a great job of capturing that and being like, you're going to have friends as you grow up, but there's always going to be something behind it. There's always going to be those life things that get in the way. And it's not just going to be that normal, unadulterated, just life.
Yeah.
Like we're just going to go do this because we're going to do it. There's no questions. That when they say you want to go find the body, we're going to get our pictures in the paper. Great. How do we lie about it? And how do we get it done? Now it's, do you want to go to a bar? Well, I had a long day at work and I don't think I'm now you can't get people to do anything. You hit a certain age, but back then it was, yeah, of course. Why would I not want to do that? Of course I'm going to go do that. It's just, this movie just captures it, and it never feels hokey. It never feels corny. And that's just such a hard thing to pull off. And Rob Reiner does it just brilliantly. And this is just one of them. It's just one of those movies. It's just one of those movies.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Man. Okay. Well, now I've recollected. Now I feel better. Nice little recollection as we go down memory lane there. Reynold Gideon wrote the book, or wrote the screenplay, and boy did he not really write anything else good. So just interesting how things like that go. But anyway, John, you have anything else that you want to say about Stand By Me, or should we move on and get on with our lives?
I think we covered it all.
Okay, so 2 movies. One that is a badass blaxploitation that doesn't feel exploitive, and then a childhood drama about a dead kid and a bunch of people go try to find this dead kid. Fun times. That's the 90s and the 80s for you. Next week, we are going to be moving on to the 2000 teens. That's where we are going. John has The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo from 2011, the Fincher one, not the OG, although in my estimation, you should be watching the OG, but we'll talk about that next week. So make sure to watch the Fincher one. That's what it's going to be. My number 86 is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but as I said, John has that much higher on his list, so we'll be talking about that later. And I'm going La La Land. Yes, the one with Ryan Gosling and the one with Emma Stone that for some reason makes people mad. I don't know why, but we'll discuss that next week as well, because I was in Hollywood when that movie came out, and boy, were people angry about it, because I just don't think they wanted to admit that Hollywood is very much like La La Land. And the reason I chose that, and I'll say that at the end here, so that when you're watching, you're going, how the hell did you get to La La Land from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? I believe that those 2 movies capture Hollywood so perfectly. And if I couldn't talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood right now, it's got to be La La Land. La La Land is an ode to Hollywood just as much as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a no holds barred version of Hollywood. And people don't like to admit that, but it gives you that age-old question of, you choosing the career or you choosing love? Which are you going to take? Because tell me somebody who's really, really famous who ended up with both and didn't end up with a couple divorces along the way. Anyway, so that's why I chose La La Land to replace Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, even though one's a musical and the other just has really great music. John, are you okay with La La Land? I actually don't know your opinion. We can talk about it more next week. But
I've never seen La La Land.
Interesting. Okay, this will be a fun one. I can't believe you haven't seen La La Land. That'll be fun. I'm curious to see what you think, considering it's a musical, considering you'll probably tell me what's wrong with it. But I am very excited for it, and Another Day of Sun will be stuck in all your heads for the rest of the week. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for tuning in. John, are we back next Tuesday at 8:30?
We sure are.
Okay, we're back next Tuesday at 8:30. We're on to a very normal schedule now, it seems. And 8:30, guys, next week, our number 86s and mine with a replacement, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo from 2011 and La La Land from 2016, I believe. Check those movies out, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.